structure and review a little bit about sentence structure that we've learned. You may ask, why does this matter? Who cares? And two things that I want to remind you of is that when you're writing, sentence structure variety makes your writing more interesting. It doesn't sound boring because you have all simple sentences, yet it doesn't get confusing because you have all long, complex sentences or compound complex sentences. Also, keep in mind that you'll be taking the ACT your junior year, and sentence structure and punctuation is a big portion of the English section on the ACT. Let's start with simple sentences and look to see what those are. Simple sentences consist of one independent clause. Independent, remember, means that you can live alone. If you are independent from your parents, you don't need their help with housing, with food or money. You can live by yourself. The same with a sentence. It can stand alone, or a clause if it's independent. Two examples here are: we completed the mountain hike. We felt exhausted. That's very simplistic, like a reader you might have had in first grade or kindergarten. And if you write like that consistently, then your sentences will begin to sound short and choppy, and you will not have an interesting writing that's on 10th grade level. Compound sentences help alleviate that, or because they join simple sentences. So compound sentences are two complete simple sentences connected by a conjunction with a comma or with a semicolon. So first of all, I want to talk about how to avoid a run-on sentence. You can't take the two sentences that we just had and combine them and just put them together without any punctuation. That's a common mistake. So take a second and read the example of the run-on sentence. We completed the mountain hike. We felt exhausted. Those are two different thoughts that come together without any pause or thought. So that's called a run-on. You need to try to avoid that. You have to have some kind of punctuation there. If you use a coordinating conjunction with a comma, you would combine those two sentences into a compound sentence by saying, we completed the mountain hike, comma, but we felt exhausted. Two complete sentences always use a comma before the coordinating conjunction. You could say, and we felt exhausted. You have a variety of choices, but always make sure your coordinating conjunction makes sense, that it fits what you're trying to say. You can also combine two simple sentences into a compound sentence. If they are closely related, you can use a semicolon. We completed the mountain hike, semicolon, we felt exhausted when we reached the summit. That gives you a pause there and combines those correctly. This is not a compound sentence. We completed the mountain hike but felt exhausted when we reached the summit. Even if we say but felt exhausted, we have a simple sentence because we just there have a compound verb, not a compound sentence. Complex sentences are the next type of sentence that we want to talk about. Complex sentences contain an independent clause and a dependent clause. Dependent clauses, remember, cannot stand alone. They have to have the independent clause as a helper. Because the mountain hike was rigorous, we felt accomplished when we reached the summit. We felt exhausted when we reached the summit is an independent clause. We felt exhausted is the independent clause. When we reached the summit is a dependent clause. It has a subject and a verb, we reached, but it cannot stand alone because it's not a complete thought. Here, you do not use punctuation because the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence. Example 2 shows the dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence. When we reached the summit, comma, we felt exhausted. You do use a comma after the dependent adverb clause because it's at the beginning of the sentence. In example 3, I'm showing you how you can put a dependent clause in the middle of the sentence, but you need to set it off with commas. We felt complete exhaustion and satisfaction. That black part that's underlined is your independent clause. That is a complete sentence by itself. It is interrupted by the dependent clause as we reach the summit. We reached as the subject and the verb, but that's not a complete thought. So when you put a dependent clause in the middle of the sentence, you need to set it off with commas. The final type of sentence we're going to look at today are compound complex sentences. These are more difficult to write and to keep clear when you're punctuating. A compound complex sentence has 2 independent clauses and 1 dependent clause. Remember, the independent clause can stand alone, but the dependent clause cannot. An example of a compound complex sentence: we completed the rigorous hike, but we felt exhausted when we reached the summit. We completed the rigorous hike. We is the subject, completed is the verb. That is the first independent clause in the sentence. We felt exhausted is also an independent clause. We is the subject, felt is the verb. When we reach the summit, as we saw in the previous sentence, is a dependent clause. So here you have your at least 2 independent clauses and 1 dependent clause that makes a compound complex sentence. So let's look at it again. Remember that a compound sentence has 2 complete sentences. We completed the rigorous hike, but we felt exhausted. That sentence is a compound sentence, but we've added the dependent clause when we reach the summit, making this a compound complex sentence. The same punctuation rules apply, so you've got a comma after hike and before the coordinating conjunction but. I hope this has helped you review today. If you have any questions, please let me know.